ancient Egypt. Or if you live out in the country, or have lived out in the country, if there was a hole in the barn wall, that is, a nut was knocked out, the cows on the outside appeared on the wall of the barn, upside down. And in Egypt, you went in this dome to see the upside down world. There was a little hole here, and the daylight came in, and you saw people walking upside down on the wall. How many of you have experienced that kind of phenomena? That is essentially the box hole camera. A camera, the simple camera without a lens, is just a little hole in a box. And somebody said, well, how can I see that image? And they used a transparent membrane back here, and they could see the upside down head or a person or a cow. And they asked this question, if only I could retain that image. Well, that isn't the answer. That's just a question. I wonder how I could retain that image. So, years before that, the American Indians and other primitives have taken tapa cloth, or they'd weave natural materials into a kind of a fabric. And then they would take berry juices and dye it different colors. Sometimes a leaf would fall upon that surface, and after the sun dried it, they had an image of the leaf. So they began to use dyes from this background. That all human beings, to understand me better, the first human being that jumped off a precipice with wings, he died. And his brother-in-law wrote, next time, make the wings larger. No one starts out right away and solves a problem, unless you have a tremendous background in many different areas. Well, the next guy that jumped off, he jumped off with the larger wings. And he flew a little, and then they went. And the old fisherman said, you got to brace them wings, like a boat, like a mast. They're not going to hold, so they braced it. And then they jumped off the precipice, this individual, and he flew, and he hit a tree. And he hurt his leg real badly. And his wife said, you know, John, a fish has a rudder. Good point. And they stuck the rudder on the airplane. No one ever sat down and invented a television set, an airplane, the electric light, wireless. None of that came about by men walking in deep concentration. And then through some ethereal substance, bingo, the idea is formulated. It doesn't work that way. It's hard work. And I make more mistakes than anybody I know, because I try more things. There's nothing wrong with building something and finding out that it doesn't work. This is where you get your experience. There's nothing wrong with criticism. I remember the first model airplanes I built went nosing into the ground, and I was ashamed of them. And a young engineer told me that my center of gravity had to be corrected. That is, move the wing forward. And so all of us stand on the shoulders of one another, and we shape the future. Another question that was asked, well, somebody had to invent the bow and arrow. Somebody had to think of it. It just didn't come out of nowhere. Well, I talked to many Indians, and after talking to many Indians, this is what I found out, that Indians used to skin animals, and this is a lousy drawing of the skin of an animal stretched out in the sun. When the Indians got back, the skin was half the size. It shrunk and became thicker. And they didn't like that at all. So they cut leather into strips, thin strips. And they took an existing frame and they tied that skin to the frame. Some of you may have seen this. With lace of leather all the way on, prevented from shrinking. But when they cut the strips of leather and put them out in the sun, they shrunk and became fat and short. And they were displeased with that. After many, many years, one Indian tied that strand of leather to a piece of wood, a stick. He split the top, tied a knot, and tied the leather to the stick. When he came back, hoping that it would dry and not shrink, the stick took this form. It was bent. He plucked at it and went, bong. Well, and after many years, somebody took another piece of wood, put it in and pulled the string, and off it went. Well, if man can't think or reason, where did the movie camera come from? Somebody had to think of that. It doesn't exist out there. Well, here's where it came from. Many, many years ago, thousands of years ago, in China, they used to take a candle and they'd take some bamboo paper at the time and put it in front of the candle, and then they'd cut out a little figurine of a human being and put the candle behind it. And as the candle undulated, the little person would dance, and they'd play music. That was the beginning. How did that happen? Some guy had a candle and a piece of paper, and he just happened to be behind it, and his finger appeared to move on the screen. And so he extracted or built upon that phenomena. Then later something interesting occurred. The Chinese used to take these tremendous scrolls and open them up. Well, they then later taped, or they wired, or they used gut and tied many pages together and built a kind of a pad. But in order to get to a particular page, the Oriental would mark the corner of the page so that they can find with a symbol. And as you flip through the pages fast, that little dot would jump all over the place. Well, years later, an individual drew various successive pictures of a bird in flight and put them down on the corner of the paper and flipped it. And the little bird wings began to move up and down. Well, a Frenchman saw that, and he took little pieces of cardboard and he put them in a circular pattern. I'm going to try to get it down as clear as I can quickly. And he put a crank up here that you turn, and the little pictures would go around the circle. And the Chinese had something like this also, and they had a bamboo interrupter that would just hold the picture for a few seconds, a second, less than a second. As you turned it, a man appeared to move across the screen. Well, the Frenchman machined that out of brass, did a beautiful job, and when you turned the crank, the person walked with smoother motions rather than these abrupt motions. Edison saw that unit that the Frenchman designed, and he turned it into this position. I guess I can't work with that microphone. Can you hear me back there? Okay. And what happened is he turned it into a vertical position, and all the pictures were set in a circular fashion. And you turn the crank here.
Excuse me. They won't get the audio on the camera.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Why don't you just put it in your pocket or something?
I'll try.
Or hook it to your waist. Slip it in your pocket.
Thanks. Roxanne is my associate. She works on all the buildings and all the things that we've developed in the Venus Project, which I'll talk to you about later. And Edison purchased this, put a magnifying glass in front of it, and you put a nickel in, and you turn the crank, and you saw people moving. A bunch of still photographs. Actually, the Wright brothers read about experimental aircraft, where thousands of people died trying to develop a flying machine. And after picking up bits of this information, including man-carrying kites from China thousands of years ago, and they built the first flying machine. And they were called the father of flight. Again, there's no father of anything. You may take an idea so far, you add to it, and gradually it's built up. A genius is a person that has been exposed to many different systems, and therefore